But yeah, Inside Number 9. Go watch it if you can find it. I don't know.
Ruben, start the fucking episode.
All right. Hello and welcome to Power Reflections, a proud member of the Doof Network, where we reflect on Wildbow's most revived work as it releases. I'm Ruben Morehouse.
And I'm Elliot Diebold, and everything is fine here. We're not actively unraveling.
No, we're coming at you live on time in the Discord. Huzzah! So if you want to come to the Discord and watch us, listen to us live record, and you get access to a huzzah emote, and it's great. And you can come just hang out, and we always start properly on time.
Huzzah! Yep. Just perfectly on time. Speaking of on time, we are running a fan art contest, and you need to get submissions for that in on time because the due date is the day we all leave for Hawaii for Malia's wedding, which is very exciting. But that means we won't have as much flexibility to give people an extra few days or anything to get fan art submissions in. So all the details will be in the show notes down below. But yeah, and in celebration of Malia's wedding, the contest theme is "Till Death Do Us Part," which I'd like to point out. Malia suggested that, okay?
Yeah, it does sound a bit grim, doesn't it?
Like, we said we should do a wedding one, and then she said "Till Death Do Us Part," and I was like, that's good, but I think it was important that she said it.
Hey, you know how, speaking of on time, while we're talking about on time, what has Justin Timberlake been up to
Fucking hell.
You know what I mean? Like, I feel like I haven't seen him in anything, or like...
Doesn't he do more social stuff? Like, he's doing a bunch of like startups, or is that Ashton Kutcher I'm thinking of? They're the same person,
Kutcher
right?
is doing all the like
social
anti-child sex trafficking stuff.
Yeah,
if that's what you mean. Yeah, this episode is going to have the same vibes as our April Fool's Alexander episode. I remembered the worst part is like, as we started the episode, I remembered the other thing that I was going to talk to you about, and I'm kind of tempted just to dive right into
We're so late, Ruben. We need to go. Speaking of the fan art contest and other on-topic things, just a reminder that Poke is one of the stories that we take submissions for, and the theme is "Till Death Do Us Part."
That's a very good point.
So just because we've actually accepted Poke entries for a few competitions in a row, never gotten one, and I've understood that until now. Yeah. But I'm going to be disappointed in the community if we don't get at least one Poke's fan art this time.
Our fan art contest themes have to get more and more overtly about Poke.
Eventually, we'll get one. One last bit of housekeeping that I do want to do before we finally
begin the episode.
Yeah, God, somebody said we've got pale in comparison energy today, and that's very true. I'm going to put in the show notes for this episode, and I'll post it on our Discord and our Twitter as well. We're just going to run a quick poll. We're interested to know how many people who listen to this show have read PACT. We're planning some stuff both for All Packed Up 2 and for next month while we're away visiting Hawaii. We're just curious to know, what ratio of people have actually read PACT. We'll probably have the question about how far in you've got or something. I'm seeing that question in the chat. So yeah,
it's trolls, Elliot. That's the answer. That's what he's been up to. He's been doing trolls-related things because he's one of the leads in Trolls.
Yeah.
So mystery solved, I guess. Anyway, so let's get into it. Let's talk about 23.E, the Friends and Family interlude. I've titled it here. Does that feel right to you?
Yeah, Friends, I think would do.
Friends, Family, and Mr. Gill. I think those are the three perspectives.
Friends and Mr. Gill, I think.
Well, would you call Sylvia a friend?
Yeah,
that's why I put family in.
Let's get there. We'll have plenty of time to talk about Sylvia.
Is she more of a friend or more family? Interesting. So yeah, the Negative parents are being the worst. They refuse to just stop talking and listen. Thank God none of our Kennetia's parents are like that.
Yeah, but I mean, Ruben, wouldn't you also be distracted if your kid was off at some magic school, potentially doing drugs and having sex and smoking?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I do. You got to feel for these parents. It's sort of like, their kids are missing. They're like everything the kid. Like, I do think there's that bit where Avery's like, "Are you sure you're doing this well?" to Gillette. Gillette's like, "Man, I don't know." And I
Yeah.
was like, I really felt that because I do think they were kind of like just trying to throw spaghetti at the wall, and I thought this was a pretty understandable reaction from these parents.
Yeah, it's quite funny. So I didn't quite make this parallel until my second read through, but the way that the negative parents react here is effectively exactly the same way that Sylvia reacts. Of like, we're trying to answer the bigger question that your question is getting at. Like, let us do that, and then you'll get the information you want. But they're kind of like, no, we need to be parents and do our parenting, which I think is really interesting.
Mm.
Especially because we then get the Mr. Gill perspective for a little bit, and that really kind of like he
Yeah.
comes across as annoying when we're in the Jeremy / whatever, like we're basically with Julette in this first part of this chapter, right? And he comes across as quite annoying, but then we get the bit later which really softens how I felt about Mr. Gill, at least.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
thinking about that and trying to apply that to Sylvia, I think is really interesting, because I think something kind of similar happens with Sylvia, right? Where we're quite
Yes.
annoyed with her, and then that is, I think, softened a bit by the end of our time with her. Hopefully, I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be really interesting to talk about that. But yeah, I fully agree. I think the through line of Mr. Gill mirroring Sylvia's is really fascinating. Um, but obviously, like the one big difference here is obviously I think there's a difference between like Sylvia and Verona, who is her actual daughter, in a one-on-one setting, being like, "Listen
Yes.
to me," versus there is a bit more of a mob situation going on with Avery and Julette. That it was like I could give the parents a little bit more leeway because they don't know Avery and Julette.
No, and also they don't know where their kids are, so it's kind of like
Yeah,
at least knowing
exactly.
that their kids are alive and safe is like, you
Yeah.
know, yeah,
Like I was willing to cut them a little bit more slack in this direction that Sylvia maybe gets, but we'll talk there. I just thought that was really fun too because what I thought was funny is like Gil was like irritating me, but in this way where I was like, I get it though, which like hit me because this is usually a trope that's a bit of a pet peeve of mine. Like Doctor Who uses it a lot. There's always one person who just argues against the person who knows what's happening and is trying to explain it and tell
yeah.
everyone to remain calm.
Just
There's that
kind of
one.
for the sake of arguing, almost, it seems.
Yeah,
It feels like it's so that we can have a character who's the villain, so that we can kill off
yeah.
somebody a little bit, and oh, it's sad that they died, but not that sad because they were arguing and being annoying.
And that's it. Yeah, like things like Doctor Who is definitely the one where it always feels like it's just okay. Yeah, we need the token guy who's a dickhead who won't cooperate.
Yeah.
And Mr. Gill didn't feel like that. Like he was just like, no, shut up. Tell me how to get to my son. And it was like, this is a reasonable position for him to take.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, the other contrast that we have here, I think, is contrasting the way the parents act to the way the kids act, right? Like we're in Jeremy's head here, and we see Jeremy be very confused and kind of not know what's going on, but then act from a place of trust, which I think is really interesting, or like trusting Verona brackets Julette enough to do what she says and like try and help in simple small ways and like take a bit of initiative when they're standing in the circles, but not so much that they're like disrupting what's going on. Yeah, it's another interesting contrast, I guess.
Yeah. Like in a way, it sort of made sense to me because I was like, well, yeah, of course the kids are a little bit better at like shutting up and just listening to the person who seems like an authority, especially when that person is another kid, like because like school kind of forces you to do that. So I think it's interesting that like in a way, it's almost like the parents have lost that ability to take the kids seriously. Yeah, like because you're right. Like it's actually like Jeremy teams up with like George and eventually all the others to actually get Mr. Gill and stuff to shut up and restore a bit of order. So it's like they're doing a lot better, and part of it is because they're actually willing to engage with Julette and Avery as subject matter experts.
Yeah, yeah.
I also love Jeremy as the POV here. Like it gets called out overtly later on in the chapter, but like we know he was a prime candidate for being a Kenneteer. And I thought there were a lot of fun sort of, I don't know if they were direct parallels or just vibes, but this reminded me of when the Kenneteers in 1.1 or 1.2 went to the clearing where they did their awakening ritual, and they were getting kind of made aware by the Kennet others.
Mm.
And so I thought, like, it was fun seeing this through Jeremy's point of view, this kind of awareness, because it helped to highlight the differences between how Kennet did it to the Kennetiers versus how the Kennetiers are doing it to these guys. Like, obviously, these guys are under a lot more direct, instantaneous pressure. But like Julette and Avery are really giving them chances to back down and like leave, and they're trying to like explain what they can, as opposed to like, Miss just didn't really answer questions directly and stuff back in the day.
Yeah, did we? I'm trying to think back to how much we know about the awarening process of the negatives and trying to see if there's some good comparisons that can be made there. But I can't really remember much about if we know much about how that happened, other than like the fact that they kind of brought in people they thought would be a good match, and then the kids kind of continued to bring in people and all that jazz.
Yeah. I have a feeling theirs was a little bit like, I don't know that we've seen any of it firsthand either, but my guess is that it was a lot more kind of like they generally probe you, probably run it past Marissa and Liz, and then you just kind of get thrown in the deep end where it's like, this is magic.
Less informed consent, I guess.
Yeah, 100%.
But I guess they had the option to back out, so you don't need informed consent as much if you have an undo button. I don't know.
Until Lucy meddled.
Bloody Kenneteers. Hey, let me ask you a question, Elliot.
Yeah.
So obviously others are real. We are just innocents, and so we have never become aware to the fact. But I want to ask you this question, and I'll give you my answer. What do you think is the closest you've come to seeing an other and becoming aware? Do you have any experiences you can point to of like, this, I think, could have been another? Maybe my answer isn't quite the correct answer to this question, but I've been thinking something that has stuck in my head a lot is, in Taskmaster, in the first episode of the season that Katie Wicks is in, she does this thing where she dresses up as a cult with like four other cult members stuck on her shoulder with balloon heads, and she just walks in and in this kind of soft voice goes, join our cult, and then kind of walks out. And it's this like very quietly unsettling thing that has stuck with me for a long time. And I think that's probably the closest I've come to seeing a real world other.
Okay. That's not the sort of example I was expecting. I definitely... I know what it was. And look, if you don't want to hear a story that might trigger arachnophobia, skip ahead 30 seconds in your podcast.
Yeah.
I had a bunk bed growing up, and so I slept on the bottom bunk, because who the fuck wants to climb to the top bunk? That's what they don't tell you about top bunks. And I was reading a book. I must have been like 8, and I saw this like little baby spider hanging. You know how they like drop down on their web, like come sort of on the other side of the bed. And I was like, oh, that's weird. Anyway, keep reading. And then I saw 2 more on the other side of the bed, and I'm like, oh, that's weird. So
what's surrounding you?
Well, yeah. So then I poke out from under the bed to like look at the roof. There were at least, I want to conservatively say, 400 billion baby spiders. Just my roof was literally swarming.
Wow.
The entire roof with baby, because it's basically what had happened. My parents had gotten this is what innocence cooked up, I guess. My parents had like hired a contractor who was doing stuff in the roof, and he opened up like a big nest egg spider thingy. And yeah, so basically I ran out of my room screaming, because about 30 of them started dropping when I started screaming. And I slept on a mattress in my parents' room for about 3 weeks after that, at least. But anyway, I'm pretty convinced that had to have been some kind of other.
Yeah, Beleg Tal just vocalized a thought that I was also having, which this is just a low-rent version of the Magnus Archives that we're role-playing right now.
Yeah.
Interview with subject terminated. Anyway,
cool. Get back to the chapter. Actually, the other thing I wanted to call out from this early section is and I think I saw other people talking about this. I fucking loved how one note Mia was in this section, where she's just like, this is who Wallace needed to be looking out for, apparently, because Mia is fucking ride or die for Lucy. Like I hope Lucy gets to hear about this, because this is that sort of thing where like, one of Lucy's big things for the whole story has kind of been she needs those people who just have her back and like tell her she's not going crazy. And I feel like Mia just sort of rocking up here and being like, is this for like, will this help Lucy? And they're sort of like, yeah. And she's like, cool, I'm fucking in. Like, let's do it.
Yeah.
Like, she's like, I don't want to stay in Kennet, but I'll
Ride
help
or
Lucy.
die. Yeah.
Like, yeah. She
it is
like
quite nice, isn't it?
Yeah. Mia fucking keeps stepping up.
Yeah. Yeah. This is going to tie into our discussion question, but it's very interesting to me to think about like Mia and Jeremy and especially Caroline, and think about how the kids are going to start playing into the story now that they're becoming aware, which I think is wonderful.
Yeah.
So yeah, Jeremy is doing his best here to help out while also being kind of worried that he's about to be ritually sacrificed.
And I really love that. I think the bit of logic that really makes Jeremy not think they're actually going to be ritually sacrificed is he's like, Avery just doesn't have that vibe. And I thought it was funny because like he's literally just learnt that in fact Avery is a secret witch with magic powers, and he didn't know that.
Yeah.
But like her naive good bean energy is just so strong that he's like, oh yeah, like sure, she was keeping magic a secret and has been lying to me the entire time we've known each other and like all that, but like Avery, the sacrifice, nah. Like eventually Avery's going to kill someone's whole family, and that person will be like, oh wow, she must have had a really good reason.
Yeah. She's just got that naivete vibe, doesn't she?
She's just so trustworthy.
Yeah.
Because she's so not transparent, but like she just I don't know, natural, genuine.
I really, something that I kind of noticed in this section with Jeremy is like he's mainly reacting to Jasmine a lot, which made me think about and compare the way the kids and the way the adults react, where Jeremy is like, sees Jasmine, sees how seriously Jasmine is taking this, and uses that as a cue to be like, okay, an adult is taking this seriously. I have to kind of be also taking it seriously. Whereas like, it almost made me think that like, because there's adults here taking this seriously, it helps lend a sense of authority to it, because kids somewhat see adults and parents as authority figures, right? Whereas like Mr. Gill and Sylvia, Sylvia has had these interactions with Jasmine where Jasmine has said to her, hey, take this seriously, listen to what they're saying, do what Verona's saying, and she still kind of doesn't, right? And I wonder if there's just an element of like, Sylvia's an adult, she doesn't necessarily see other adults inherently as authority figures, and so she's not like primed to go along with it. I don't know.
Well, I do think there's a little bit more to it than that, because it's not just Jasmine. Like Jeremy also takes notes from Gabe's mum, who's another adult, but also I think George has a moment where they start talking about the Undercity, and George mentions that time that we've heard about a lot in the story where George ended up down there, and they're like, yeah, that was the Undercity. And that's when George kind of clicks and he's like, oh shit, this is real. And Jeremy takes note of that as well. So like, I think there's just a general thing where like, Jeremy doesn't say much here. He's very like shut up and listen vibes, and he's just watching everyone else. And so it's like, yeah, it's not just Jasmine. It's like Jasmine, George, Gabe's mum. Like he's just getting the vibe and realizing that like whenever there are individual things addressed to people, they're like, oh shit, and they get serious. And like that's, I mean, I think we've been saying since the start of the story, like Jeremy's always been a good bean. Too, so it's like not too surprising that he's good like this. But I think you're right that there's also an element of like the kids just are a bit better at I guess listening, whereas it feels like some of the adults are just like, I mean, I want to say their innocence is more set in, but like it's not just the magic system. Well, it's this fucking Otherverse. It's always both. It's like, their innocence is more set in, but it's also like that's what adults are like in real life. Like you've kind of formed your worldview, and you're less willing to fully shift it as an adult. Like it reminds me of the conversations we've had about Kelsey and Connor as they've dealt with both of Avery's coming outs throughout the story.
Yeah.
But I agree. I thought Jasmine should have had a bit more authority as a figure in this section.
Yeah. So yeah, monsters start showing up, and showing off, and a fight kind of kicks off from there. And yeah, the cats come to the rescue and become heroes.
Yeah, because luckily, fucking Puss in Boots is here.
Okay,
I don't know. We met Puss in Boots before.
Just quickly, while we're talking about Puss in Boots, I have to mention again, and I know we've talked about this in our high ground episodes. It's so crazy to me that Antonio Banderas starred as Zorro in the Mask of Zorro film, which was written by Ted Elliott and Terry Rossio, who then, I guess, liked him as Zorro so much that he just made him Zorro again, but a cat, and now he's just been in that role for like 20 years. Like,
well, especially because Zorro didn't do as well as the Puss in Boots movies.
It was a massive flop. It was a flop, but then Antonio Banderas just was Zorro so thoroughly that he's just become Cat Zorro, and that's just been. It's crazy. It's crazy. It's a wild thing to have happened, but it's very funny.
He'll always be the dad in Spy Kids to me, though.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I don't know. Because I was like, I don't think we've met this Puss in Boots cat before, but like he feels like the high summer fae version of Blankshank. Strikes me as more spring, maybe. But also, yeah, I don't know, like Blankshanks and him have a great like repertoire as well. I thought they were very funny.
Yeah. No, yeah, Blankshanks and Spades are very fun here, and effectively are like hold the line with Avery against these monsters, and then bring in what's the roadkill cat called? I can't remember what it's called.
Candleberry or something.
Yeah.
Castleberry.
Yeah, which is very funny stuff. Yeah, I never thought I would compliment a cat. I'm more like Lucy, a dog person, but they do very well.
See, what upsets me more than having to compliment a cat is having to compliment a fairy-aligned cat. It's like the worst of both worlds.
Yeah, true.
Like, goblin dogs, best boys. Fairy cats should be worst boys, but they do all right, and you hate to admit it.
You hate to say it, yeah, for sure.
But yeah, Castleberry does make up for it, though. He's fucking like, he just comes in and everyone just keeps calling him roadkill. Like, and I love the detail Mrs. Shafkat was just like, the vet refused to accept that he's alive. It's like, what does that mean? Like,
yeah.
He's alive. Was he moving? Like, yeah, so good.
Yeah, junkyard cat. He's a junkyard cat.
Yeah,
sure.
You know the cat from Always Sunny in Philadelphia?
Yeah, the episode where they steal the police car, right? And they impersonate.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean? Yeah.
Yeah, but then it comes back like 10 seasons later as well. Because it just doesn't die.
Yeah.
Yeah. It reminded me of that cat. Just this like cat that seems like it should be dead, but just won't fucking die.
But this wasn't, because there was a like zombie cat, right? But this wasn't them.
No, I think this is the goblin cat.
Yeah. Good times.
Yeah. But yeah, and also, I don't know, I thought it was funny that Julette is here as Blankshanks, does some cool stuff, because I don't know if that crush is still...
Right. That's a ship. That's a Till Death Do Us Part fan art.
Yeah, I kind of hope, like, I love seeing Mrs. Schaff's cat collection start to get, like, weaponized as she's becoming aware. I hope this becomes, like, a thing, because she's got seemingly so many. I hope that she just turns into this, like, just horrifying force who can throw cats at any problem. Like, she's like a walking Kennet of cats.
Well, she's like a magical version of the Simpsons cat lady who just throws cats at her problems. Hey, can I ask you a question here? It's something I've just realized. Let me take you on my train of thought. So Castleberry, the goblin cat, it just made me think, well, Castleberry's not really that much of a goblin-esque name. And then I was like, wait.
I assume she gave it to him.
Yeah, did she? So which of these cats has she named and which of them hasn't she named? Because Blankshanks is such a perfect name for Blankshanks.
Betcha Blankshanks came with a collar with his name on it because he probably glamoured that shit up so that she wouldn't give him a stupid name.
What about Spades? Do you think Spades is Spades?
Yeah, probably a similar deal. I don't know. They probably use tricks to make sure she called them by their right names, whereas like Castleberry's a fucking goblin cat. He probably just didn't really think it through.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, Wabo saying aware ability to know what to name them, which I think tracks to me. So then Castleberry is Castleberry, you know? So what's there's got to be
Well,
something there.
maybe Castleberry didn't used to be as bad as they currently are. Like maybe they once were
Oh
closer
yeah.
to a cat. It was like a cat that ended up in the Warrens,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
so it was
yeah.
already
That
named
tracks.
Castleberry. And then after a couple of
But
months in the Warrens, you're like, why is this cat called
but
Castleberry?
Castleberry is Castleberry a cat's name? Like I'm trying to
Uh,
think.
based on so like for those who don't know, one of my sisters works as a vet, and I've heard of much stupider names that
Top
she's
10.
come.
Give us the top 10 list. Okay,
Oh,
top 3.
I
Okay,
wait,
top
hold on. I
1.
can't. God, they're all disappearing from my brain right now. Hold on. I'm just gonna message
Maybe
her on
this is your
Facebook.
aware moment, Elliot. Is the cat names are your entry into the world of magic, but they're just slipping just out of reach. Oh no. One of the cats is called Elliot, magic is real, pay attention, and you just can't remember it.
Um, yeah, but no, people come in with weird pet names and sometimes funny ones. Like
Mm.
she's had quite a few people where they've brought in cat like or like a cat. Like they had one called God, my brain just isn't working. What are the names of the brothers in that anime where they're alchemists?
Uh
Full
Full Metal
Metal
Alchemist. I
Jacket.
want to say
Yes.
Jaeger, but maybe I'm just thinking of Attack on Titan.
Anyway, somebody came in with two cats named after those two brothers, and
Edward
Hannah.
and Alphonse, that's right.
Yes, yeah. So they came in with two cats, one named Edward and one named Alphonse. And my sister was like, "Oh, like." Yeah, it turns out, yeah, her husband had named the cats, and she just thought they were nice names. She had no idea their
I
cats were
love
named
that. I
after.
love when that happens. There's so many stories on Reddit about people,
Yeah,
spouses secretly naming things and not telling their partner. It's great.
yeah. But no, my headcanon's going to be that Castleberry was a cat that ended up in the Warrens
Mm,
and already had the name Castleberry before it got so
yeah, that tracks.
goblinified.
That tracks. Um, yeah, well done to the cats, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, there's a bit in the middle of this fight. So this is where Louise tells Jeremy that he was a candidate for being a Kenneteer,
Yeah.
and he's watching like Avery fight these presumably boogeymen or something, maybe goblins, I don't know. Um, and he's watching and he's like, "Man, what would I have even contributed? Like, why me?" And I was thinking, "Fuck, that's the most Kenneteer thing you've thought all fucking chapter. Like, that's your candidacy right there. Thinking you don't have anything to contribute to the team is like the most important step in being a Kenneteer."
Mm, yeah. Fit right in, Jeremy. Well done. So yeah, we now jump to Sylvia's perspective. Sylvia's at Verona's domain, but for real this time. But she's being the worst. She refuses to just stop talking and listen. Thank God none of our Kennetier's parents are like that. I mean, never mind.
Yeah, again, a statement that I think arguably holds up.
Ooh.
um, yeah, I mean, this is probably what we'll be talking about for a bit. I think because it's like there was a thing. I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago where there was a bit where Lucy was looking at Yi Yun and was like, she reminds me of Sylvia in that she's kind of a mom but without the kid. And that was the quote that kept
Yeah.
popping into my head as I was reading the scene with
Yeah.
Sylvia, where I'm just like, Sylvia's whole vibe in this is just like, I get it. Like, listen, I get it, Sylvia, but like, also just mum the fuck up. Like, I get it, but just Jesus, you've got to at some point realize that like this is your kid, and or I don't know. It's interesting because she's like, almost what Verona is asking from her is to stop treating her like just a kid. Like, it's
Yes.
like maybe it's almost the opposite, where like Sylvia is just stuck in treating Verona like a kid. It's like Verona's actually like, no, I need you to listen to me as the expert in the room and let me take the lead.
Mm. Yeah, it's really interesting, I think, because it's hard to know how harsh we should be on Sylvie here because she's just not
Yeah,
operating on the right level at some point, right? Like, I think we've appreciated Jasmine's ability to not just kind of let Lucy railroad her as a parent, right? Like she thinks and she kind of imposes things that she thinks are fair even if they're not necessarily playing along with what Lucy would want at a time, which I think is kind of what Sylvia is trying to do here, but just like, it's too late, Sylvia.
Yeah.
Like, it's too late to try and do that now, because the situation has gotten to a point where doing that is now actively harmful, right? Like,
Yeah. Well, and this is the thing. Sylvia keeps being like, look, can we just take 5 minutes to take a step back? You need to give me more context. I don't understand. And Verona's like, here, literally checking if her friend's alive. And she's like, I don't have that time. And Sylvia's like, it's unfair. And like, Verona's sort of like, okay, well, first of all, like, fuck you for telling me telling you things is unfair. Like, but then there's also this vibe of just like, you had your fucking chance. Like, I'm sorry, it's not fair, but like, fucking deal. We're in crisis mode here. Like, sucks to suck.
That is hard to, like, the fact that is also magically inclined to push itself out of your head makes it very hard to be like, no, how dare you so weird. Especially because, like, if somebody is in crisis mode, often taking a few seconds to be like, okay, let me like take a breath, stop, don't just panic react, but let's plan react, is often a really good move. But people are literally dying. Like, Lucy might be dying right now, so it's not necessarily the right move right now.
Yeah. And it's that classic thing that we've seen with the awareness before, or the not yet awareness, where it's like, the concerns Sylvia does keep getting hung up on. It's understandable that it's a little hard for her to shake that those are top priorities. Like when, like when Verona is like, oh yeah, that's my chair where I tie up my prisoners. It's not a sex thing, but I do have sex. And like Sylvia gets a little bit caught up on that, and Verona's trying to explain to her that's not the priority. And like half of me is like, listen to her, but then the other half of me is also like, fair that you're going to get caught up on that, right?
Yeah.
Like,
I think there are some things where it's like, Sylvia, now's not the time. Like, she focuses on the boys thing a bit too much inside her own head, right? Like, that's one to me where it can be like, that's clearly not a priority right now, but she gets caught up on it. That's one that's easy for me to judge her a bit for. But then the ones where it's like, oh, here's my setup where I cook meth effectively. Is what Verona says, right?
Don't worry, it's not drugs; they're magic drugs. And it's like, sorry, I'm gonna need more.
Yeah, no, of course, like, that's fair to get hung up on, I think.
I guess like this is what's fun about Sylvia going through, is especially getting to see it in her head. It's like, I really kind of related to how much she's got that sense, and it's a very adult thing, I think, but it feels like Sylvia is a really bad case of it. She's just like, she talks a bit about how she spent most of her life, I guess, like like playing the game, or like following the tracks that society laid out for her. And like she's not. I feel like she's somebody who spent her entire life kind of learning to try to be normal, do things normally, I guess. Yeah, following the script. That's a good, that's perfect. And like she's recently broken out from that and found the stability. And this was kind of the hanging point of her last conversation with Verona that we covered like a month ago, where like Sylvia was very much like, no, you don't understand. I finally carved out a version of the script that works for me, and I'm scared to lose it. And it's like, when we're in her head, we kind of see her unwillingness to break from her version of this script now, because she spent her whole life following scripts and they're not working, and now she's finally found one that works. And I can really relate to this idea of her being extremely unwilling to let that go, and that's why it feels like her innocence is just fucking fighting with everything it has for her to just not really engage with this, because she's like, just as a person, this is again like the magic system is really just complementing the humanness of the situation here. She's just like, I totally understand why somebody who's been like this is just like, I can't please, like, I've just found something, I've got this stability, please don't, like, Verona is intentionally being like, or outright saying to her, like, I'm trying to turn this over on its head. Like, so yeah, my part of me was just like, oh, Sylvia, I get it, but how many times does Verona have to say it? I think this is the thing. It feels like it takes Verona 50 times of saying, you need to listen to me. And I'm like, I think for the first 20, I was on Sylvia's side. And then Richie, I'm like, hurry up.
Yeah. Should we talk about the crow humping toads bit? Because this is the bit that really feels the worst, is Verona keeps saying, I need you to prove that you can listen to me, at least for a moment. All you have to do is say this thing, and it takes about, it's 22 lines or something. It's about 10 lines back and forth between Sylvia and Verona before she finally says it. And it's so painful. It's like really, it like, God, that's the low point of the chapter to me, is that bit. It just like really is rough.
That was the part where I just wanted to start like shaking Sylvia and being like, get your head out of your ass. Because it's like, the thing that got me is I feel like in that situation, what I would do, and what even Brett would do, is say crow humping toads and then just go about what she was doing anyway.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it's like, it's not that hard to just say the words and then kind of ignore their meaning, but she can't even manage to say the words for so long. It drove me nuts.
It's very frustrating, isn't it? Because it's her chance to prove to Verona, like, I want to work with you to figure things out. You know what I mean? Like, that's what it is, right? Is Verona extending a, hey, let's work together, and I promise I'll help you figure this out. And she just is like not being willing to do that. It's oh God, it hurts.
Yeah, and like again, this just I'm really focusing in on this model of Sylvia as somebody who has her kind of comfort zones or her lanes that she will go in, and she just like, one of those lanes is like Verona is her little girl, but also someone she's not that close to. And so she's just like, it just takes so much to get her to hop off the tracks and engage with Verona. And it's so frustrating, but also I kind of get it. And that's what I love about this segment is I really feel for both of them here, which is, I feel like the ideal in drama like this in the story. Like, and again, I think we said this last week, but I'm finding this so much more fascinating than whatever that silly war is at the Blue Heron Institute. Like, give me this shit. Because like, and I think what I love about Sylvia being this person who very much has like her lanes and this script that she follows is because that script is a very, by traditional standards, kind of carefree and like adventurous thing. She doesn't give you that impression. Like, she seems like somebody who is a bit more of an Aunt Heather who's just like going with the flow, but it's like, it's actually, that's just masking the fact that she's very rigid in this sort of system she set up for herself, and Verona has to absolutely bash the door down past the innocence to get through it and change stuff.
Yeah. It's not all bad news though, Elliot, is it? Because our favorite Kennet Below citizen has survived.
Yeah, we've got to talk about that. Verona checks everyone, and the only person she checks who survived is the trenchcoat mouse. Is that, have I understood that segment right? Because that makes me equal parts laugh and cry.
Well, does that imply the trenchcoat mouse might have become a turncoat? I hope not.
Well, sorry.
I hope not.
No, I guess, didn't we learn the trenchcoat mouse was a black sheep?
Right, yes.
So maybe that was the edge you needed. So yes, I know like other people survived, but like, as in, of the ones Verona checks, I thought she checked like Mal, Anselm, School Painter Boy, and like all of them.
They're all gone.
Like, you know, the B team.
We do get confirmation that Bracken and Bag are okay. Was that this chapter or was that last chapter?
I think that was this chapter. But anyway, I would have been really fucking mad if Bag or Bracken were gone.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm mad that Anselm and Mal are gone too, but Bracken and Bag would have destroyed me.
Yeah, that would have been rough.
I just want to talk about as well, like, as we're sort of moving on from this Sylvia segment of the chapter, I really love this as the sort of potentially final boss part of Verona's arc. Like, I think it was a few weeks ago we talked about, like, with Lucy's fight, how it felt like it was bringing a lot of threads from her character journey and the whole story kind of to a head. And you can see a lot of that with Verona here. Like, I think it was last week we were talking about how much Verona doesn't like to lose her momentum. Because, you know, similar to what we were just talking about with Sylvia, but she was mourning the fact that she loses things like anytime she gets equilibrium, she loses it. And obviously she's just lost Mal and Anselm, which is like the ultimate test of whether she can recover from an upset. And then also I think like the way she's having to force Sylvia to be a parent here is such an interesting way to tackle the poor relationship she's had with the concept of parenting throughout this whole story, because it's like we saw so much of this story was like her unwilling to ask for what she needed or appear like she was whining because of what Brett has put in her head with regards to that sort of way of reaching out. And so this was like Verona sort of having to overcome all that and like force Sylvia, who is very reminiscent of her in a lot of ways, to basically be that person for her. And it's like such a huge moment that Verona is just able to like take Sylvia aside and basically be the Brett, but like in the good way.
Yeah, interesting. Well done, Verona.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm very excited that we'll, I assume we'll get some taste of where this is going with Avery next, like where it feels like we are sort of starting to address these points for all three Kennetiers. And I'm excited to see how Avery's going to go with the concept of romance and being alone. I have a feeling Nora might get dragged into all this.
Yes, won't that be fun? But yeah, we get a brief perspective change here where we go to Mr. Gill, who calls his son Dony, one of the negatives who I don't think we've really...
No, I think he's one of the new recruits, I think.
Yeah. And it's just like really nice, like tactically very fun, because it sounds like Dony might stop fighting now that his parents are around, and maybe some more negatives as well, which means like awareing their parents is going to be a very funny strategic move. But like, just also nice to know that like there's this interesting mirror of parental support, and it's kind of like, oh, it's nice that the negatives will get some parental support, and hopefully the Kennetiers will, I guess specifically Verona will too.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a fun kind of irony to the Kennetiers weaponizing awareness.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree. I love how like Donnie's dad is pretty much, well, they call Dony, and Donnie's pretty much immediately like, Dad, I would love to come with you, but I can't.
Yeah.
And they sort of reach this kind of agreement. Not much is sort of hard said. In fact, it sounds like Donnie's going to go talk to Carolyn, which great.
Yep.
But like, yeah, Mr. Gill, the phone call sort of ends, and Mr. Gill's like, okay, he clearly doesn't want to be there. Let's call up the other kids. It sounds like we're going to be able to talk a lot of them down. And like that's sort of the encouraging vibe from this segment, is like these new awareness basically talk to their kid for 5 seconds, and they're like, okay, we can win these kids over.
Yeah. Yeah,
like,
which is nice.
It's like Cameron and Carolyn are probably going to be the difficult two.
Yeah. Yeah. But hopefully that will be a fun, a fun thing to help turn the tides for our lovely Kennet others.
It's going to be weird when these awareness show up, like, because like it seems like in their heads this isn't that different to like coming and getting your kids from a particularly rowdy party.
Yeah.
But it's not that. So that's going to be fun for them.
It's going to be fun for the others, and for like, fucking Marcy and shit, like the ordinary family. I don't know. So yeah, Lucy is continuing to fight the family man, but is losing more and more with each victory.
Yeah, apparently literally nothing on heaven or earth can stop Lucy, the absolute fucking maniac.
Yeah, God, what a baller. She kicks his ass blind, which is crazy.
And deaf.
Yeah. So no wonder Lucy is the best Kennetier according to most recent polls, and if you ignore the polls where she isn't, like, she's the best.
I want to criticize the way you're ignoring the polls where she's not the winner, but I'd be lying if I said I don't do the same. But yeah, I think we talked about this last week. I hope somebody is keeping track of all the gainsayings that are happening regarding the sword move.
I don't know what you're talking about. According to the most recent polls, and if you ignore the polls where she isn't, Lucy is the best Kennetier.
Oh, yeah, okay, that's technically fair. I mean, this is so great as well, because we even talked, she's blind, deaf, and she manages to get cursed so that she has a phobia of blood, so she's having like a mild panic attack.
Yeah.
And it just like, God, don't become enemies with Lucy. Like, Jesus.
It really made me laugh when she was like, I don't know exactly what the wording was, but it was like, oh, my foot stepped in blood. Something wet. I don't know what it is. Oh, yeah. Don't think about it. It's like she's thinking her way around this curse in a very funny way.
Yeah, because luckily she's a blind, which helps. But yeah, well, I guess especially coming off the bit with Sylvia, or like we have the Sylvia bit. We learn that Verona learns that Mal and Anselm are dead, and I finished that section, and I was like, wow, these guys are going to be sorry they fucked with Verona. Like Verona is about to go fucking nuclear, and then we like cut to Lucy, and I was just like, oh, one of them already is, because this girl is blind and deaf and afraid of blood, and is still handily taking out or holding her own almost against like a demigod.
Yeah.
And I love this, like again, talking about sort of heading towards closing threads through the story. I felt like this was a great callback to Lucy's implement ritual, because I remember during that time in the story, the big thing for Lucy was she was getting taught to like trust her instincts and trust her intuition. And that's really what she's able to do here. Like she talks about, like Guillemette has been training her so that all of this fighting is instinctive, and then she's just able to use it like that. Like she's blind and deaf, but she basically predicts most of his attacks based on what she expects him to do. So it's like all that stuff that I think the first third of the story was really hammering in for Lucy about learning to hone your instincts and to trust your instincts. That's how she wins this fight here.
Yeah, true. She's honed her instincts with her various training that she can trust them to kick some solid ass.
And because it was like Guillemette and the earring are the two big figures that I remember being the voices telling her to trust her instincts, and she kind of doesn't have either of them with her here. She just has the training they've given her, and she's able to use it.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's also obviously able to rely on her allies. Like she's basically, we kind of learn at the end of this, she was just stalling for time until they showed up. Like she knew they were coming. Which, I guess that's technically not unique to Kennet right now. Like the family man obviously gets the child's respawn at the start of this fight, which is still bullshit. But yeah.
Yeah. Gosh. Yeah, that child's respawn still feels very bullshit. I love the way that they defeat it in the end.
Yeah, and like I'm not gonna lie, I felt good for Verona watching her just kill this man, which I was like, again, I feel like I was saying this a few weeks ago. Part of me's being like, stop celebrating this kind of violence for a 14-year-old girl as killing a guy, but also part of me is just like, just after what Verona has gone through, what we just watched Lucy go through, part of me was like, fucking Zaheer this guy right up. Like, I'm happy to watch him die.
Yeah, it was satisfying, I suppose.
Yeah, like
something to think about in the sense of they spent a lot of effort not killing him before.
Yeah, which I don't know. They gave him chances, right? Like they took him out of the toxic power structure he was in, and they said, "Don't be a cunt." And then he immediately went and doubled down on it, and picked a side that just really ticked Verona off. And after what he did to Lucy, I was like, part of me was like, I shouldn't be celebrating this, but like, watching them Zaheer him and keep him in that container as they drained all the oxygen out, I was like, I don't know what else she meant to do with the guy at this point.
Yeah.
And I was angry about Mal and Anselm as well. Like, I do think this is a bit of have the Kennetys ever just fully killed a person like this so straight up before? Like, I mean, it feels like arcs and arcs that the story has been talking about.
Alabaster. That's a good point.
Well, no, I think Lucian misestablished that the Alabaster killed herself by their hand.
Yeah.
But that was a little. I don't know. That felt like a little bit different. And I mean, this is something. The story it was arcs ago that the story was sort of like, things are going to escalate. You're going to have to cross lines, like blah blah. So like, I'm not really saying this was wrong or I'm surprised. It's just like, I don't know. Part of me is like, this is a bit of a turning point, right? The Kennetys will just all stand here together and, with extreme prejudice, kill a guy. I mean, yeah. Like as I said, I don't disagree, but that's just like, this is a thing they do now. It's exactly what we're talking about with Lucy, when Lucy shot him and aimed for his brain, and it was like, that was what traumatized her about Alexander's death. And then she did it without even thinking there. And it's like, this is what the Kennedys are sort of becoming now. They just happily kill this dude, and that's good, but also a little sad that they're now people who can just do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
Well,
this would be where the awareness come in, I think, at some point.
yeah, I guess we'll have to see. Like, I guess it ties into what we're about to talk about, because they're talking about how they're about to go for Charles's throat, and Verona seems to want to kill Charles instead. Which is interesting. Like, just an interesting thing to.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to shout out, I think it was in our first episode for this arc, we called out a comment from Tusawat, who suggested that Go for the Throat might also be talking about the chakra, and like the fact that it wasn't just about the idiom, but it was also about the fact that the throat chakra is all about communication and stuff. And I mean, that gets made explicit in this chapter, so absolutely nailed it 2 months ago, I think, Tusawat.
Yeah. Well done. But yeah, I mean, presumably we're talking about cutting off connections to his crew, like the Aurum, Marcy, maybe the Angel Investor Lords. I don't know.
Yeah. See, I want a tinfoil. I reckon go the other way. So part of what I was thinking, and I think it was like a few arcs ago that I was really modeling or using a model for Charles that was around him treating everyone kind of like summons. Like as a summoner, he's somebody who viewed humans, others, practitioners, whatever, as components and like machines that can be improved or disassembled, right? Like we've obviously seen that with the girl by candlelight. But even people like Kira Lynn and stuff, like enhancing themselves as practitioners, I think like a lot of Charles's ethos is he sees people as built up of components, and it's essentially your job and the universe's job to enhance your build up of components. And that's obviously like a really shitty attitude. And I want to see the Kennedys weaponize it against him, because I think what would be really funny is if they're going for the throat in the sense of basically manipulating his being to fuck with his throat. And I think rather than switch it off and like cut him off from the Aurum and Marcy and stuff, like maybe try to do that, but like boost his throat. Because the problem with Charles is that he keeps acting in the sidelines and doing surprise attacks and stuff. And if the throat is all about your social connections and how you communicate with people, if they like boost that shit up, so Charles is kind of essentially always broadcasting what he's doing to people, he can't keep working in the dark. So like maybe the solution for Charles is to fuck with his throat so that he's kind of connected to everyone and is in, like, he can't keep operating in the shadows, basically. Like dial that shit way the fuck up.
Interesting. Interesting, and an interesting inversion of what I think everyone would assume when we hear what they're kind of planning, which I think is
and it feels very Kennet too, to be like, no, you are a part of the community. Like, this is your throat. You are connected to everyone. Do your job good, like.
Yeah. Interesting.
Like, and that, I mean, that wouldn't be the whole plan, because that just fixes like part of the problem with Charles.
Yes.
So like, this tinfoil certainly doesn't accommodate for all of it. But I think in particular, the going for the throat part, I think it would be fun if actually Kennet's solution was to take somebody's throat and dial it way the fuck up.
Yeah, very interesting. I like it. But we'll have to see next time, I guess, because that's the end of 23E.
Yeah. I mean, do you reckon we're nearing the end of...
I genuinely have no idea.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I don't think either of us have a great track record at knowing when arcs are ending, but...
Yeah, it's impossible to know. So, before we end our episode, though, we still have our Pale predictions to get into. Predictions left by folks in our Pale Predictor spreadsheet, or we sometimes pull things from the Reddit comments, which I think is what we did this week.
Yeah, I don't think we had any new predictions, which is wild to me, because I would have thought this would be the time to be spouting tinfoil about how the ending's going. That's what I just did.
Spouting tinfoil about what magical powers the new Aware are going to get. That's what I want to know.
Yeah.
I just want Carolyn to get some kind of magical horse powers, That's all I want.
What sort of magical horse powers do you think there are?
Well, at the risk of taking us back to the topic we were talking about before we started recording, in Shazam 2, there's a scene where a character bonds with a unicorn, and that's kind of what I'm talking about, I guess. Just like, magical ability. Well, I guess we've got the cat lady. If Carolyn's a horse girl, maybe there's a magical equivalent of that. I don't know.
That would be so expensive, though. Like, so Sengachi's asking if I've ever seen a horse girl movie. My sister was a horse girl.
My sister was a horse girl movie. Okay.
No, she genuinely. There was like a God, she probably wouldn't want me telling everyone this. There was like a 2-year period where she would like run around on all fours in the backyard and jump over stuff, like pretending to be a horse.
Yeah.
And like I did 2 years of horse riding just because the whole family got involved because she was so into it. We watched the Saddle Club religiously in our household as a part of this, so like I'm very aware of the horse girl movie genre. But like horses are expensive. Like you couldn't be a Mrs. Schaff for horses, or you'd just be broke. Like Mossa would be the only one who can afford that.
So how would it work then? I don't know. I mean, I guess it could be more like if we're going along with the vibes of like a kid who pretends to be a horse. Maybe it's more similar
like
to
Animorphs.
The what were they fucking called? The cougar kids that Mal was with when she was sieging the BHI.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Where Carolyn like collects kids who pretend to be horses and rides them into battle. I don't know.
What? Okay, if I'm thinking, and I'm going to apologize if we have any horse girl listeners because this is going to sound harsh, but like, I feel like there's aspects of the horse girl energy, and that's what I'd lean on for deciding what a horse girl aware power would be. And so, like, part of that energy is just, I mean, and it's not their fault; it's the horse's fault. But horse girls always stink.
Oh, interesting.
Because they're always around horse shit.
Okay, yeah.
So that, like, I don't know, something about, there's like an aspect, like, as much as it's like, I see horses as very, like, fancy things, but then there's also, like, I don't know, like their nature, right? There's like a grottiness to them. And I feel like that's what I'd start to lean into, is like that weird dichotomy of how you're like, somebody who, like, gets power out of it, but also there's a bit of goblin involved.
Do you think horses are more... I'm coming to the same conclusion that I think Aziza did it is coming to, which is horses feel like the perfect intersection of Fae and Goblin. Do you think they're more Fae or more Goblin? They're very much in that...
I guess in much the same way Mrs. Schaff has goblin cats and fairy cats. I reckon there's probably horses that skew both ways, but I think overall they're probably right in the middle.
Yeah, very interesting.
Because, whereas like cats, I feel like probably skew Fae more generally, but there are definitely, like, one of my sister's cats is for sure goblin.
Yeah.
I reckon if we took that to the vet, they'd want to double check that she is alive.
Interesting.
Whereas like I'd say dogs skew goblin on average.
Well, we're dancing around our discussion question for this week. We'll get to it shortly. But for now, let's go back to our Reddit comments, shall we?
I'll just pull mine out quicker. I've got one from Bayushi Kazemi, who's in the 23.e thread, obviously, who's just going on about how much they love Mrs. Schaff, which is the correct opinion. And they brought up, no wonder Taddy and her goblins got their asses absolutely handed to them when they tried to invade Mrs. Schaff's house. And I think we might have called this out, like another comment ages ago, but I just wanted to give it a shout out again because I'd completely forgotten. But I think when we heard about Taddy invading this house, we thought it was just a lot of cats. But now, like, knowing what these cats are, it's like, what the fuck was Taddy thinking?
Yeah.
Where the goblins were so out of their league trying to fight these guys.
Yeah. It's a really good point. I pulled out a comment by Ren Gill, which at the time I was looking through the comments was the lowest voted comment on the thread, and it kind of made me laugh, so I wanted to pull it out, which was, I'm glad that all it took was the death of several characters before the trio decided to finally take their gloves off and kill people like the Family Man. And it just kind of made me laugh with this approach of like, the Kennetys should feel more like, I don't know, like, murderous Batman vigilantes.
Yeah, Rengill voicing what the worm reader in all of us is thinking, which is
just pull out a gun and shoot them.
Yeah,
I don't know. Yeah, it's just funny stuff. I really liked it. I mean, it was like there's a fun sentiment to it as well that has a kernel of truth.
Yeah,
that's why it's so fun, right?
Well, because this is the whole, like, this is the thing that's been memed to death with Batman, right? But the whole idea of, like, at a certain point, killing the Joker is the moral thing to do because he kills dozens of people, right? So it's like, at a certain point, maybe you need to accept that reformation isn't going to happen. I think that's what's so fun about Pale, is it tries to present all the different scenarios. Like, I love the way Wildbow explores these ideas and goes into all the thesis. Like, there's some people who are sort of like, no, they just needed a bit of help. And then there's other people like Brett where it's like, I mean, you can give them help, but that's pouring sand into a black hole.
Yeah.
And that's, like, it's a hard line to walk. Like, you could argue it would have been better if they'd killed the Family Man last time. But, I don't know, Charles probably would have found someone else. Who knows?
Yeah, it's good stuff. But yeah, so just some fun comments from the Reddit thread. As a reminder, folks, you can find the link to our Pale Predictor form in the show notes down below, where you can leave your predictions about what magic powers Carolyn's going to get.
Yeah, and other things, but mostly the Carolyn thing, I think.
I don't know about other things. Mainly that stuff, yeah. Should we talk about our discussion question, Elliot?
Yeah. So last week we asked everyone what you think of the Kennetys' plan to awaken all these people. Like, what do you think about the concept of weakening innocence?
Yeah, and we got a few answers to this one. Actually, we got more answers than I thought, considering a bunch of answers came in, at the 11th hour.
Yeah.
I liked Landis 963's answer as a good kind of simple summary of, like, in an ideal world, probably this isn't something that would need to happen, but the Kennetys are being shafted a lot, and it's a good move as a mess with the paradigm enough to make an opportunity kind of move,
Yeah. Like, it brought up an interesting thought to me, which is, like, we've given Charles and the characters have given Charles a lot of shit for how much, like, Charles's whole thing in Arc 13 was like, Mrs. plan sucks, it takes too long, people are being forsworn, it must end now, let's tip the table over, there's no time to lose, it's rotten to the core, like, we need to be violently revolutionary. And now obviously he's taken that step back and he's, like, talking about getting in with the world powers and being a bit like, no, I'm just laying seeds. And it's like, okay, well, which is it?
Yeah.
But, like, the same can kind of be said for, what has become of Miss's team now that Miss has taken a bit of a back seat, which is, like, the Kennetys are vastly moving up the sorts of timelines Miss was talking about. And they're having their hands forced to do it.
Yes.
But it's like the interesting compromise of this war is both sides are starting to get closer to resembling what they thought was problematic about the other side to begin with. Like, Charles is doing exactly what he told Miss and the Kennetys was the problem with what they're doing, and the Kennetys are being forced to do the same thing to him. Like,
yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? This is what Ripper 1337's discussion question answer made me think. Is like, they were talking about how it takes us back to basics, so we can build up again, and this is the exact same thought I had of, like, well, that's what Charles wanted. Like,
yeah.
Really
but I do think the Kennetys are not doing it as bad as Charles did. I think
no,
and I think
of course,
like, that was the thing. I think it was Lucy thought in, like, one of her early chapters this arc. I want to say, like, 23.6. But, like, Lucy ended the chapter by thinking, like, I want to change things like Charles, but not use his methods. And that's like what this is like the Kennetys are being forced to resemble Charles more, and that they're making more drastic, radical changes than they originally aimed to do this quickly. but they're trying not to do it in such a destructive, shitty way.
Yeah.
And like that's as Quero Cafe is mentioning in our chat here, like Pale has been talking a lot throughout its whole runtime, like what does fighting right look like? Like Pale, I think more than most other stories, is asking you not just what you're fighting for, but like what you're willing to do for it. And I love that as the stakes have escalated, the Kennetiers are having to make bigger choices in that regard. That like are ones that 10 arcs ago they might have not been so keen on thinking about.
Yeah. Propaganda Pagoda also had a discussion question answer, and they kind of broke down from a few different angles the reasons that they liked the Kennetiers' plan. And the one that really landed to me the most was the sixth point they put, which was reciprocity, of like the Kennet others and the Kennetiers have worked very hard and sacrificed a lot for the sake of the innocents. And so, it's like fair enough to loop them into help now.
Yeah.
It's very simple and I liked it. It was good. They also
Yeah,
talk
I
about all
agree.
the more obvious kind of things that I think we've talked about a bit more, but that one to me was like really just simple and nice.
Yeah, because that is like the problematic part of innocence is that kind of separation of the innocence from the rest of it, right? And there's like certain part where it's like, guys, we need the fucking help. Like, yeah. I also liked their fourth point, which was I thought was the main thrust of why they were doing this at the start, and it ended up being different. But like I think this was in the Kennetiers' plan, and they just accelerated it to stop Kennet Below. But part of the thing for me, I think, making people aware fucks with Charles's jurisdiction. I think it gives more people like under his or in his domain, right? Like his job is kind of to protect innocence, but he probably has to work more actively with Aware and like account for them and stuff. So it's like it fucks with the way his jurisdiction is put together, which is interesting.
Yeah. Then we got two answers delivered to us at the 11th hour, which means we haven't had a chance to read through them and reflect on them as deeply. Which one should we start with, Elliot?
Yeah. Well, so Tasawwat is basically talking about like what some other answers touched on, which is like the main like thrust of the original seal was that there are a lot of scary monsters out there. Like we've seen some in this story. Some of them are named Charles, and so like this is the thing is I think a lot of us kind of get why the seal happened when it did. It probably made a lot more sense in that context. And it's only now that the power dynamic has flipped that the seal's just hurting people who don't deserve it more than it's helping people who need it. And like so I guess sort of coming at it from that, it's just like that needs to stop was basically part of what Tasawwat was talking about. And basically the one of the things they said was that the way the seal's currently operating is it puts too much of the power in the hands of too few. Like it's a system that is not that egalitarian. Like it gives practitioners all the power or gives powerful others all the power. And so Aware work to balance that by it's essentially sharing knowledge and then sharing the ability to act on it. Which makes sense. Like we're talking about the changes with Sergeant Hall is something that Tasawwat talks about and how it's hopefully working better now that the Aware are running the asylum,
running the show. Yeah. I think it's interesting. Like the seal was a means of protection for the innocents, but is now a tool of subjugation for lowercase I innocent folk like Nibble or whoever, right?
Like Tasawwat specifically calls out Tashlit, like Peckasnot, but yeah,
totally. I think Vice Versa's answer touches on some similar thoughts of like the seal is there to protect folks, but awarening / awakening, I guess, is an act of empowering people to an extent, right? Like it trades a kind of almost vibes of like a nanny state security blanket for empowering you. You know, you get to play in the dirt, and that comes with a risk, but it also strengthens your immune system, right? Like, yeah, pointing out specifically the idea of community as something that is needed as a form of protection when you don't have the kind of generalized protection of the seal, which I think is a really interesting thing to point out, because this is not just making people aware and ditching them, right? It's the making people aware as a part of Kennet, and Kennet having a unified, you know, we are Kennet, we're going to help Kennet. We're going to help Kennet, right? You know, it's like there is another level to it. It's, yes, we're weakening you theoretically against whatever Charles sends at you, but also we're empowering you to be part of a community that will stand alongside you, which I think is an important thing to take note of in this instance. It's not just making people vulnerable, but it's making people vulnerable and taking accountability for them actively in the community.
Yeah, and hopefully empowering them in other ways. Like Tasawat and a few others mentioned the idea of basically people who are knowledgeable and like informed and stuff are harder to manipulate. Like they're more empowered. It's harder to use them as tools. The other part of Vice Versailles that I really liked was the idea. She actually brought up a great comparison to Bristow stuff, where like she sort of mentions, you know, you've got these C tier superpowers like gathers cats or magical item magnetism.
Yeah.
And those, like, that's shit. Like that, and that's not helpful. Like Clem's life was not better because of her aware superpower. But Bristow showed us that you can set up these communities and use diagrams to balance that energy and create ecosystems. And Bristow did it in a shit way, but like this is sort of what Kennet's all about. And like this is what things like bringing these aware in can do, is like there's a good way to build versions of Sergeant Hall where it's empowering these people and like you know, you're creating these combos and stuff in a good way, right? Like it's like taking all these components of shitty superpowers and putting them together. Like this is what Pale's all about, is take these powers and strengthen, like take this diversity and strengthen it through synergy.
Yeah. So some great discussion question answers. We've got a new discussion.
I'm easily impressed has asked a fun question, which is, how do you do a good musser? Like if we're talking about doing a good Bristow, what is a good musser?
Stealing people's stuff in a good way. I'm trying.
There's such an unhealthy relationship with the concept of ownership inherent to the mussers. There's hard. People bring up like the idea of Robin Hood practicing or redistributing wealth, which I like. I also think I would hold up Rook as not the best, but an example of this, where she takes people who are problems like Bridge and kind of imprisons them and binds them and then gets them to do good as a kind of pretty forced and rough and slightly punitive reformative justice.
Yeah. I mean,
and so like I would like the closest thing I can think of to Musser but done well is if you're taking intentionally and like really bad shitty people, essentially being a benevolent dictator, like which is, you know, a thing that happens a lot. But like you get someone like Lucy who basically takes shitty people and forces them to work for her and be good.
Well, like Anthem maybe is a good example of someone who's been good mussered. Right? Like imprisoned,
what
forced to do community
Anthem,
service, and now is a cool guy. Thumbs up.
Like Bill New Year's Eve though has brought up like what Rook did with the Turtle Queen, which is a better example of how Rook's done this than Bridge. Like Rook tends to take these people and be pretty rough with how she binds them, but it kind of ends up being good for them.
Sorry, Bill New Year's Eve though, Elliot, it's Bill Nye though.
Oh,
you fool! What are you talking about?
Oh,
I was like, who are you talking about? I can't see this person, and I saw it, and I was like, sorry. Anyway.
I forgot that that's a person.
Bill
but that's not who their avatar is as well. Their avatar's the other science guy. What's his name?
But don't worry about it. Anyway, let's move on. That was just so funny to me. Bill New Year's Eve, the science goo Year's Eve. Yeah, very, very good. So we've got a new discussion question, which
So
I think
Bill Nye and Neil deGrasse Tyson are both in an episode of Stargate Atlantis. That's very funny. Anyway, sorry. Now that very important interruption
that
has
was
been
very
made.
important to say. Yeah, we've been kind of talking around this discussion question all chapter, which is which new aware will be the most helpful. Really, what this question is make some cool predictions about some of the new aware. Because that's what I want to do, and what we have been doing with Carolyn a lot this chapter. But yeah, like, which of the aware do you think is going to be the most fun to be on team? Or what powers are they going to get, or who's going to be the most helpful, etc. I think will be very fun.
Yeah, I agree, and yeah, I think it's a fun question to ask because we've just awoken a bunch of them.
Yeah. So yeah, you can leave your answers to that discussion question in our discussion thread, which you can find linked in the show notes down below. And you will also find a link in the show notes to our Pale Predictor form where you can leave your Pale predictions.
Yes, also check out that discussion thread, the show notes, Twitter, Discord, whatever. There will be that poll about whether or not you've read PACT. Please fill that in because we'll be using that to make decisions about stuff like All Packed Up too.
Indeed. So do that. Hey, if you want to check out more stuff from the Duff Media Network, you can go to duffmedia.com. It's a website. You can just type that into your Internet Explorer, and it will take you to a page where you can find out all the information about the Duff Media Network. You can click around. It's got links on there, which will take you to other pages. You'll figure it out once you get there, I think, but it'll be a great time. So go there.
Yeah. Don't forget to check out the Doof Patreon as well. Patreon.com/DoofMedia. That's how we fund things like the fan art contest that's going on that you can submit poke or other story content to.
Mm-hmm.
It's also where we fund things like the new emote that we mentioned earlier. There's obviously the new Percival Huzzah emote on this server, and we used Patreon money to fund the artist to draw that. So that's the sort of thing that money is going towards.
Yeah. And of course, while you're on the Duff Media Patreon, make sure you also check out Inside
Huzzah.
Number 9, which is a great TV show that I'd recommend to everybody. It's really good. It's a British show. Check it out. It's really fun.
Yep. Yeah, don't forget Wildbow's Patreon as well. Patreon.com/Wildbow. I feel we end literally every episode telling you to go vote to his Patreon. So you're kind of being a Sylvia if you haven't been listening to us and still aren't donating to that Patreon, if you think about it.
Yeah. All we want you to do is type crowhumpingtoads.com into your address bar, and that takes you straight to Wildbow's Patreon. Now, let me just quickly check that that's not some kind of horrible website. .com. Sorry, I'll just open that in an incognito browser. Oh, good. It's not a real website, so it's fine.
Cool. So go donate to Wildbow. He's writing this story. We wouldn't have it without him. That should be all the reason you need. But also, we've been telling you a lot, so don't be a Sylvia.
Don't be a Sylvia. Go give Wildbow your silver.